and how they will go if you do not prepare for them. So just remember that most of the time, more injuries, more severe injuries, and more deaths will be caused by those employers or places of employment that were not ready to respond to an emergency. Yes, during an emergency, there'll still be injuries. Some things may go wrong, but you're going to do your best so that nothing goes wrong, right? And if God willing, the amount of injuries will be less. You will probably have no deaths, and the severity of injuries will be greatly reduced. So that's the goal of emergency preparedness, to foresee anything that could go wrong so that you are prepared with a response plan, not a reaction plan. It's not you're going to react. Anytime we react, it doesn't go very well. But if we respond, then we will be in better shape. So thank you to those of you. I've seen so many of your names throughout the many months that we've been hosting this free webinar. Spread the word, please. Let other coworkers know about this free webinar, especially if you're trying to get them on board with you to do the same thing or help you with your safety efforts at work. All right. My name is Alba Vazquez. I'm grateful to UCLA, UCI, Southern California, NIOSH Education and Research Center for putting together these webinars and bring them to you employers every first Friday of the month at 11 a.m. Please spread the word. I am not an attorney. I am a consultant, and I am also an authorized OSHA trainer for both industries, general industry and construction. And I'm happy to be here today. Please, if you have any questions, ask them. The session is being recorded. Remember, we record the sessions for your review later on for the benefit of those that want to take a look at these sessions or assign them later on to some other party or supervisors, managers who need to be aware of the requirements. Because I come from the Cal OSHA perspective of things, that's what I will deal with today. I will give you some resources from the federal side of the equation. But for me, because I'm in Cal OSHA and you guys are in California, Cal OSHA is the one that rules here, right? And they're awesome. They have the consultation side and they have the enforcement side. So remember to always call them when you have any questions and call the right number. So find out your district office. There's always a district office wherever you're located at. And they have two different numbers. One is for enforcement and one is for consultation. Enforcement is called whenever you have hospitalization or a death at work and you have only 8 hours to call them up, right? And remember, it's inpatient hospitalization, not just for observation. Otherwise, a fine of $5,000 could be issued to your place of employment. And you don't want that. You want to look like the hero. You want to do things right. And you have the consultation number. Consultation, they're great. They always answer your questions. These are people that want to make sure that you are on board, that you're compliant, that people stay safe. So they will do as much as they can to provide you with as much information to keep everyone safe. So once again, thank you all of you for being on board. Our learning objectives today. I want to list the requirements of the emergency action plan. So there is an actual law. It's a standard. It's an actual very short, brief standard, just a couple of lines there. It's not like this week we also went over the aerosol transmissible disease standard, and that's a lengthy standard. It's so comprehensive and there's so many nuances. So what is good about it is that they tell you what they need you to do. They don't tell you exactly how to do it, but they do tell you this is what we need you to do. And so with that freedom, you're able to grab from a lot of different resources in order to comply. But the actual regulation, and they do borrow from some other regulations, but the one regulation that applies for this particular emergency action plan is Title 8, California Code of Regulations 3220. So we're going to list those requirements. And then we're going to explain the importance of preparing for all types of emergencies that could occur at your places of employment. For this, of course, sometimes we oversee or we lack more vision and we're not able to write down everything that could go wrong. That's why the word brainstorm exists in our dictionary. Use the help of others, use their brains. Two heads think better than one. Just get into these meetings where you're putting together your plan. And this is today is the day to update your emergency action plan, to go back, make a list of to-dos and make sure that whatever we talk about today that you're not doing, you do it. So go back. Is the best day today to go and brainstorm about all the different situations and emergencies that you've gone through in the past and that you haven't been ready for. So in number 3, understanding the top 3 elements of emergency preparedness that will make a difference when responding to an emergency at work. And one of those I can tell you right now is confusion. One of those elements in your emergency preparedness that will make the difference between a successful response and a disaster will be how confused are your employees on what to do. If they don't know and they see a sign that says, in case of a fire, break glass, because there's an extinguisher encased in glass, and someone reads that and they're just breaking any glass and they're breaking a window, that's when you know you're in serious trouble. People are confused. They don't really know what to do. So seems funny, right? That's an example that seems funny, but the reality is that's when things go wrong. That's because you haven't practiced. And there's a saying that says, and I think I have it next. I'll tell you about it, but it says, practice makes perfect. And it's so used and overly used, especially when you go and you receive some classes, dance classes, little league coaches use it all the time. Practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. No. Perfect practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect because every time that you practice, you determine there are some deficiencies. You're not doing it right. And some people got trapped in their office. Some others didn't want to come out because they were too busy in their computer. They knew it was a drill, and so they ignored it. So that's imperfect practice. You practice the drill, but you fail to actually get all the information that you need to see and reassess it. Where are we failing? How come these workers did not participate? And then, their workload, whatever it is. And then are we disciplining, right? One of the things that OSHA will always look at is within the last 12 months, if they ever get to knock on your door, they will look at how many disciplinary issues have you had in the past 12 months of your facility. If you have none documented, your injury and illness prevention program is ineffective. Okay. So if those people that stayed behind during your emergency drill were not disciplined, you are lacking in compliance. You are not putting together an injury and illness prevention program that it is effective. Effective means it works. It's not just in writing, but it actually means something to workers, right? Because then they get used to it. And then when the real emergency happens, they actually do get trapped in their office because they ignored the alarms during the drill. And now that it is for reals, they didn't come out, another emergency drill. And there has been cases where people get trapped and die. I think there was quite a few years back a museum where the actual extinguisher agent, it's special because of the type of pieces that you have in a museum, and a couple of museum workers got trapped also and died for not being able to recognize that was the alarm. So that's one of the points that are important. Confusion, if I can just help you clear that confusion and workers know what are their specific responsibilities during an emergency, that will help tremendously. And what I want to make sure that after today, you go back with something that will improve your safety efforts is that how do you clear that confusion? How can I make it practical? So we'll talk about that. Number 1, what's required? So Title 8, California Code of Regulations, Section 3220 talks about having a plan. So the first thing for you is the requirement to have a plan, something in writing, unless you're a very small employer that says that, and by the way, they do give you this exception, that if you're a small employer with less than 10 employees, you can have it just verbally talked, and you just say, during an earthquake, we do this, and during an emergency of this type, we go over there and we make sure everybody's out. Maybe because you have 2 or 3 employees. Nevertheless, do I recommend that you do not have anything in writing? No, because anything that is just verbal, those are words that the wind just took. And if it's not written, it never happened. So even if you're a small employer, I highly recommend that you put it in writing and you have a plan, an emergency action plan. That's what that acronym stands for, Emergency Action Plan, EAP. An alarm system that is compliant with Article 165 per the regulation. Article 165 basically has all of those little nuances about making sure that every single one of your systems works accordingly to manufacturer's recommendations and according to what Article 165 is all about, which I'm not going to read right now, but I can give you the link at the end. It has to do, for example, when you do a walkthrough of your facility and you see that the emergency lights do not work, they have to work. Those signs, exit, marking the exit routes, need to be lit up. They have to have a certain height. So they sell them to you already compliant with the size and type of letter and all of that. But if you're not checking them so that they have battery and they actually light up during an emergency, so you have to have a schedule to check that all of your alarm systems are working per manufacturer's instructions. Next thing that is required, so an alarm system is required, by the way, for small employers that you do not have a manual pull alarm system, for example, or you do not have an intercom system, because that's more, that's actually happening in bigger companies, in bigger facilities. You're a small employer, verbal alarms work. So yelling fire, you know, in case there's a fire, or, you know, evacuation, everyone, it's time to, or codes, a code whenever a client is angry, codes, verbal alarms, special words for emergency situations. That is a-okay, but you must put it in writing and you must train workers in the recognition of that alarm system. Types of evacuation, every single one of your emergencies will require that you evacuate different, right? Because some require that you do shelter in place. Some others require that you actually assemble in a specific area. So these are the 4 things that are required within your Title 8, 3220. And then training. Training, once again, has certain elements. And these elements, I must say, the training elements of the regulation are a little bit interesting. I'm going to get to those. But in regards to the plan, the emergency action plan has certain elements. You have to have emergency escape procedures, because you must make sure that people are able to move from point A, wherever they're working at, and move towards the evacuation route and exit the building and be safe. And now you're going to make sure that those that were evacuating, they know which one of those people have certain critical equipment shutdown procedures. So some of them will stay back just to close those valves, to shut down equipment, to turn off any electrical equipment that might have gone down during the emergency, and so that it doesn't go back on and causes injury. Some of these things need to be listed and assigned to specific personnel so that they know that the critical equipment shutdown procedures are their responsibility. The next is the head count procedures. Once they are assembled, assemble area 1, assemble area 2. They know the parking lot on the south end of the building or the parking lot on the north end of the building are the 2 areas where each group of people will be gathering for a head count. The next thing as a requirement is rescue and medical duties that needs to be outlined. So you do have some first aid CPR trained people that you would want to make sure that they know that they're assigned to do that. Some of you have fire brigades or already a body of first aid responders. And those are the people that would attend to first aid after the emergency occurs, right? So once they're assembled, people are able to take care of those that need it while other responders come to the site. And they need to know this as their responsibility because because of the requirements of this emergency action plan, they need to know that's my duty, that's my responsibility. So this is a question that I get quite often. Hey, but you know, some people are afraid of rendering first aid and CPR because they're afraid of lawsuits. What if they create more harm than good? Well, number one, the first thing you need to do as an employer is whenever you're going to train first aid and CPR people or employees at your workplace, train those that are willing to do it. Don't force anyone, okay? So that's huge because once they're willing to do it and say, hey, I want to do it, I want to be in your list, I want to be one of these people, they will be willing. And remember, the Good Samaritan clause protects them. But it's important that you do not force anyone into rescue and medical duties, okay? Preferred means of reporting emergencies. So you have to be able to have there a list of how you're going to report a fire versus a chemical spill versus a threat, for example, workplace violence threat or mass shooting. And then names, job titles of employees responsible for the plan. So you have to have an administrator, somebody in charge of making sure this happens, scheduling drills, and making sure that a review of how these things are being done is in charge of the plan, right? This person can delegate responsibilities, and he should be able to have his emergency coordinators or area coordinators. And this is a very important delegation of responsibilities because it allows for each head of department to have that responsibility of evacuating their people and shutting windows and doors as they move to evacuate as well. You never go back, and you teach people, you train people, you never go back and, you know, go to the other end of the building to close that door and to close that window. No, it's as you exit. That person has been told the responsibility is to ensure the evacuation of his group of people or his department by knowing who's there that day. And how do you know that? Well, there's computer systems and there's signing sheets, and there's a way that that person knows who's there that day and who didn't come that day. And if you're talking about big department and you're evacuating and you don't know exactly who, you make sure that that person knows how to take out that list so that at the end, whenever the head count is taking place, he's able to pull out that list or that electronic record so that he's able to know so-and-so didn't come today. So that's why they're not gathered outside here with us. And they don't think that they're trapped in the building. So all of this is super, super important. One person responsible with other people, heads of departments, most likely, who are delegated that responsibility that is crucial as an area evacuation coordinator or an emergency coordinator. So you could call them different things as long as you make a section of your plan, a definitions type of a section where you put what's an emergency coordinator or who is an area coordinator or an emergency evacuation coordinator. So you can call them what you want because there's different terms that you guys use. I've seen different terms from plan to plan when I review these plans, but I don't have a problem as long as you have a sound definition and people know who they are and what is their function, right? So you have their definition, who they are, and what are their duties, what are their responsibilities. The next thing would be the training required per the actual standards, the law. The regulation says, number one, you have to have a sufficient number of people to assist during safe and orderly evacuation. That means you can't just train one person. I think, oh, well, that's enough. But you have to really make an assessment as to whether or not you have enough people assisting the evacuation so that it really takes place in a safe and orderly manner. How do you know this? Well, first you assign, right? You assign people, and when you do your first drill, that will give you a great idea as to whether or not you have enough people assisting you the right way. And most of the time, the way it happens is that you have everybody kind of getting at the same time at the assembly areas, and the head count is happening. Not a problem. But when you start having issues where a department really didn't get the signal, or they didn't get to hear the alarm and no one told them, or just one or two people were in the bathroom and they never heard that there was a drill going, when you start having some of the feedback that tells you there was not enough number of people coordinating the safe and orderly evacuation, that's when you adjust. And that's when you start saying, okay, so we really need to do the following. Some of you that are coordinating the evacuation, go and open or knock on restroom doors and let them know that it's a drill and everybody has to evacuate. As you're evacuating, that's how you do this. But these are designated responsibilities. Next, informing each employee of their responsibility. How does this happen? This is where most of you have a lot of problems. You're like, I just don't like safety trainings, because they disrupt the flow of my day. And let's face it, most of these trainings do stop the work that you consider will produce and get money for the company and to pay employees. So you hate them. It's like, oh gosh, we have to do 30 minutes, 20, 30. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. And that's without taking into account all those guys that I'm sending for an 8-hour course for hazmat or HAZWOPER training, right? If you're handling chemicals, you know what I'm talking about. We need to really see this differently. And a lot of you have already done an assessment and an actual gathering of data in order to provide with numbers to upper management as to how much money it will save the company if they invest in training. Because, all of those hours in training cost the employer money. How much more you would save versus the amount of claims that you have a year, right? And with emergency, I know it's an interesting thing because you never know when they will happen, but you do need to look at some of the statistics in some of the areas that are more prone to flooding, earthquakes, etc., in order to make your list. And we're going to get there. but you must inform each employee of their responsibility during training. So I always do an all hands type of training for emergency preparedness. And then we assign each of the supervisors or heads of departments these tailgate meetings with each of the topics for each week. For example, if this whole month is emergency preparedness, I will do a meeting that is a quick 20-minute meeting, all hands, where everybody knows what this is all about. We go over some of the elements of what to expect. We ask questions, and then we send everybody to work. And throughout the week, in a 5-minute quick topic, 1 page, we'll discuss about chemical spills. That day, it's only chemical spills. How do we respond to chemical spills? The next one would be tornadoes, and the next one will be earthquakes or floods, wildfire, all of that. So we really need to make sure that you have an actual system for training, because informing each employee of their responsibility does not mean that during new high orientation training, you tell them, oh yeah, and in case of an emergency, you just have to report to your supervisor, okay? Sign here. You see the difference? It's huge. And a lot of you are doing that, where during your new worker orientation, basically, that's when they get told that in case of an emergency, they're supposed to evacuate and report to their supervisor in parking lot A. Okay, sign here. That's not enough, because each of the emergencies that you have will have a different response. And there's nothing better than to do hands-on, kinesthetic, proprioceptive, making sure that people do it. For example, I'm kind of nuts, okay? And I love going out there to your facilities and saying, okay, the whole room is shaking, guys. It's shaking. What are you gonna do? And then you just sit there looking at me. Oh, wow. So you're just gonna sit there as the building crumbles on you? And then you have one person that, just drops on their knees and takes cover under that chair. Man, we give a reward, whatever you want to give them as a reward, because now they're actively participating. What it does, it gives a visual aid to those that are around to know what to do. A lot of us haven't done an earthquake drill since we were in school. So since we were kids, and ask our kids about what to do during an earthquake, and they'll immediately drop, take cover and hold on, which is 3 words, right? So for every emergency, if you can give them 3 words to remember, it'll be awesome. As a matter of fact, a lot of the emergency preparedness organizations in our nation, like FEMA or shakeout.org, they provide you with 3 words to remember depending on the emergency. And that's what you want to do. So you want to train them initially, but you also want to train them whenever you're expanding the building or bringing in new machines. You want to make sure that this training happens at least once a year. Does it say once a year? No, it just says initially and whenever the responsibilities change or the plan changes. But this is where we go about doing more than we are required to do so, right? So we want to make sure that we provide people with enough information that they remember. And so the clients that I work have an annual safety activities calendar where a lot of these topics repeat, right? And it's not just once a year. Like I said, it's once a year. And if that month is emergency preparedness, throughout the month, every week, you are drilling on something and you're scheduling an evacuation drill so that they know how that sounds, what alarm means what, because remember, especially manufacturing, you guys have so much noise going on. People need to know how that sounds, right? Review with employee applicable parts of the plan and make available verbal when less than 10 employees. And this is the exemption that I said, nope. Even if OSHA tells you it's okay, if you have less than 10 employees, you do not need to have it in writing. I don't care. Put it in writing because it is important. And anything important in life, you put a name on it. You write it down. You put a signature on it. That's what you do when you get married. That's what you do when you lease a car, right? You put your signature on it. So make a plan available, make sure that they know where it is at, and review it annually. Okay, so first, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm halfway through this talk and I'm barely telling you the first thing you have to do. Well, at least we went already through the required elements. By the way, those slides that I gave you right now is everything contained within 3220. You're not missing anything. That's exactly what they require. Now they give you the freedom to do it and get all the resources that are necessary for you to put in place a beautiful emergency action plan. So first of all, who will develop, implement, maintain the plan? Have an administrator. Then make a list of all the facilities, all of your locations that will be impacted. So fixed locations and field locations. Construction, you are required to hold a meeting at the beginning of your work at that job site to tell employees, how would you get out of this giant mess building that is in construction, right? Separate plans for each facility if necessary. If each of the facilities is in a similar kind of environment, you can kind of borrow, but each of those responses needs to be well thought of. Mind you, I want to make a pause here to let you know that some regulations will bring more requirements. And you're like what? Confined spaces. It requires that you have rescue procedures in place before you start work in a confined space, so you don't have an emergency turned into a disaster. Like in 2005, in where was this? Was it in Colorado? I think it was in Colorado. A company went in there. They won the bid because they were the cheapest, which tells you, maybe not the safest. Okay, they went in a confined space. It was a big pipe type of conduit that was subterranean, and they needed to coat it. They were hired to coat the inside. So they brought in all of their paints, their sprayers, their epoxy. And once in there, it wasn't affixing, right? So they're bringing all these flammables inside a confined space. Their whole human body and their cart and their flammables fit in there. And what happened that all of the, because it wasn't affixing, all of the epoxy was not attaching to the walls of the inside, they started flushing their sprayers, and they created static electricity. All of that flushing, right? The friction of it created static electricity inside the confined space. It had flammables, which at certain temperature give off vapors that could be ignited if the concentration is enough with air. Well, that happened, and it went kaboom, and it trapped the workers inside the enclosure, and they ran in when the smoke was getting to them, and they couldn't exit because the firefighters were not there to help them during the emergency because they didn't have the equipment or the training to get in there and rescue them. They threw some bottles of air for them to have some time to breathe, and it didn't even reach them because the inclination of this enclosure was not enough to let the mask fall and get to the workers. They found 5 dead workers the next morning next to the bottles of air, steps from the bottles of air. And all because that regulation for confined spaces requires that you plan for rescue prior to the work taking place. So you're going to do a hazard analysis, what could go wrong, and have everything ready. And everything was set for disaster. As you know, always with incident investigation is just not one thing. It's a series of surface causes and root causes, right? Anyway, separate plans for each facility. Off-site work. Don't forget any of the workers that go in groups to do work somewhere else. They also need to have an emergency action plan. So that's first off. The second thing is making your list. And to make a list, you have to walk the walk and talk the talk and find the hazards. Historically, what has happened in this area? Have we had floods? Do we get wildfires? Do we get earthquakes? What has happened here? Also, historically, statistically, how many homicides, right? What type of business are you running? And historically, the data, look at the data. There's a lot of information by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by your own workers' compensation, and by your local agencies to let you know, police agencies, firefighters, etc. They will let you know what is statistically the most, the types of emergencies that occur, either natural disasters or other in your geographical area. And based upon that, you make your list. So make sure that you take into account all the components of your business. What are you doing? Do you handle chemicals? If you handle chemicals, will a small spill be likely to happen, or a major spill be likely to happen, and you prepare accordingly? How each emergency would affect each component of your plan, right? So is it by departments? Is it a whole area? So certain areas of your facility or plant may need to have a different plan for emergency response in case of a chemical spill versus other areas where offices, etc., may not be affected. Manufacturing facilities, remote locations need to be, I already talked about that. And you have to really make a list where you plan a response for all potential emergencies. So for each type of emergency, what type of response? And this is what I already said. Remember that different situations will bring other regulations, other requirements. For example, fall protection. If you have people that are working in boom lifts and they're wearing a harness, or scissor lifts and they're wearing a harness, you have to have a set of emergency response in case they fall, right? So God forbid, they didn't check how windy it was going to be that day, and as they are up there, the thing tilts and crashes against the building, and the worker was thrown, he was wearing a harness, now he's hanging. What is your emergency procedure? According to the regulation that applies, you will need to have rescue in place prior to the job taking place anytime a person is wearing a harness. So that's one of the things, just like with confined spaces and just like with emergency response during a chemical spill of a major chemical spill, where you will have to have trained hazardous response emergency people at your location, and they need to know what to do, because there's different layers, right? So the ones that discover the actual spill may not be responding to the spill. Assign responsibilities, designate specific individuals responsible for various tasks. What tasks? The tasks that you have on your screen, such as who is going to report the emergency, right? So first you could talk to the group of people saying, hey, if you discover the fire, I want you to say fire and yell it, right? And then so-and-so, because that's your area of work, you're going to monitor the evacuation, right? So-and-so, you have 2 people in your team who actually know how to perform rescue medical because they are first aid and CPR trained responders. And now so-and-so, who's usually the maintenance guy in that department, is going to shut down water, electrical, gas, some of the things that you have in your actual list of critical plant operations that need to be shut down in case of an emergency. So that's a separate list. Determining closure period. So you need to tell them from such and such time to such and such time. If the business is closed, no one is allowed to go back in. If you need to go back in for any reason, you need to request permission from, and they need to have a name. Contacting utilities, who is going to contact them, where are the phone numbers, all of that in writing. You cannot leave this anything to chance or Googling at the very minute that you have the emergency. You have to address the chemical spill cleanup, like I said, and address expectations of each employee. I'm going to share with you just a little bit of what you could put together. Well, this is workplace violence, but you could put things such as this is earthquake, let's say chemical spill. Hazardous chemical spills or releases can be recognized visually, sometimes visually, sometimes by odor, sometimes by a hissing sound, a piping system or a valve that is broken and you can hear the hissing sound. Sometimes gases or certain chemicals do not have odor and they're not visible either. So you need to make a list of what are the types of chemical spills you could have, right? So the bigger the operation is, the bigger the list, the more complex. And some of you get to a certain threshold that you're required to follow a different regulation, right? Which is chemical safety processes. And that has a separate requirement. So if you don't have this plan, also talk to me about it, but certain amounts of chemicals at certain facilities when they hit certain amounts, quantities or thresholds, a different regulation requires them to actually have flow charts of how things could go wrong, containments, and how can we contain spills without causing harm to not just the people, but the environment and areas around it. So if a chemical spills, alert others in the area who are at risk and notify member management who will initiate the 911 notification system. So as you can tell, I have here a 1 through 7 step on what to do if a chemical spills, right? And so what you do, and this is what I said to you, you have your all hands meeting, you tell them that this month is emergency preparedness. So throughout the month, every week, you're going to be discussing one of these topics. And if it's chemical spill, that's when you start saying, so-and-so, you know where the chemical spill kit is. They go, yeah, it's behind the drums, wherever we have the actual containers next to it. Okay, you tell them the location of where the spill kits are, because that will have everything that they need to actually pick up and clean up after a spill for that specific type of chemical. That's when they discuss it. It just takes 5 minutes for them to know what they're responsible, where to find the materials to do it correctly. Okay. But just an example, walk in an orderly and quiet manner, report to designated fire evacuation locations for head count. And this is, you know, if a chemical spill occurs and workers are not trained in how to pick it up, only to contain it, you discuss 1 through 7, right? In electrical utility failures, something similar as well. If you realize here, this was for an Anaheim location. So where to report the outage, the status, where to call for the status and power outage. So you have these numbers within your plan and you don't have to scramble. And that's why an annual review of all of this is necessary, because phone numbers change, people change, come and go, new job titles, new positions. You need to review this plan. Okay, let me get back to my PowerPoint. I just wanted to give you an example. So procedures, what to do in the event of a fire or other emergency. Remember, this is required. How to report the emergency, how to account for employees, what to do in the event of a business closure, how to respond to natural disaster, how will you train them? So all of this, after today, you're thinking, let me rethink this. I don't think we've done a drill in forever. So that's the first thing. You're going to start with your evacuation drill today. Schedule it today. And then you're going to take a look at your evacuation map. Have you really put together a nice, beautiful map that tells people at least 2 ways of exiting the building? And it tells them if you're on this side of the building, you can exit this way and go to assembly area number 2 versus assembly area number 1. It also should tell them the location of fire extinguisher. Like, this map does not have it anywhere. They should know, especially those that are assigned to the use of fire extinguishers. Not everybody should be getting those fire extinguishers and try and fight a fire. It's a false belief. We only see it in movies. There's only so much material inside a can that you can discharge, and they're only made for small fires, and you still have to call 911. Fire alarm pull station locations, who is in charge of pulling them, how does it sound, does it go through the intercom system, how long does it take for the fire department to come to your facility, and where are the assembly area. Conduct your training, and during the training, discuss the responsibility of each of the workers at the training. That's why I go from an all hands meeting to small departments discussing each of these sheets on each of the responses. That's what's key. Why? Because smaller team meetings allows for you to truly talk face to face about your responsibilities. Remember, you've got all of the shutdown. Remember, you've got rescue and medical duties. Remember, your responsibility is to walk out and evacuate and move towards assembly area 1. That's when you really talk about this. But if you don't practice it, you're not going to get this done the correct way. And this is where people sometimes say, well, you know, I see fire extinguishers, but can I use one if I need to? That's when you respond to this question. Say, no, you are not assigned for the use of an emergency portable fire extinguisher. Only assigned people will and know how to use it. Because when you do fire extinguisher hands-on training, you discuss the fact that it's only intended for small fires, right? And you talk and discuss about how to do it, the pass technique, and never to put yourself in a situation where you may get trapped, all of that. Notification, warning, communication, locations, practice drills, duties, hazards unique to the job site. So the practice drill is something that I do need to put down on your list today. So the first thing, review your plan. The second thing is do a practice drill. Evacuation drill, and then do a survey as to how it went, and if how during the head count did everybody exited the building, if there was some people missing, who was missing, where did they stay inside, why did they stay inside, do you have any policies in writing that says what you're going to do when people are not participating in training? If you don't have policy, that's another to do policy, disciplinary policy that includes when people are not participating in emergency drill or training. You could just take it into training, any training. Perfect practice makes perfect. So at least once a year, but some schools are doing it quarterly, especially after those mass shootings and things that they realized they didn't have a response ready. They're actually drilling till they get it done the right way. They even use things such as, phone alerts during mass shooting, and also phone apps where they will tell the student or the staff member where to go, because the threat is located at the south end of the building, so they can move in the opposite direction. So then I go just real quick into some of the responses, the correct responses for each of these types of emergencies. Here is something that I need you to know. When you prepare your list and you're looking at the information in front of you, you're going to note that some things do not happen to you, like the risk of tornadoes. You're going to really find that statistically in your area, tornadoes are very rare. So should that be top of mind? No. But how about workplace violence? And how about wildfires? When you get a copy of these slides today that I have on your screen today, you're going to see that I put them in order. In California, there historically, throughout many decades now, the third most common way to die while on the job is workplace violence, homicides, and especially for smaller retail businesses that are open between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And even those businesses where they may not be retail, but historically, they other people committing these acts know that you are active before those hours. That's where statistically this activity happens, okay? Assaults and homicides between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Workplace violence, third most common way to die on the job here in California. The first one is transportation incidents, and I always repeat it, defensive driving is one of your best bets, a fleet safety written prevention. And the next thing would be falls, slips, trips, and falls. Oh, what do you know? Those are the top three. The next one is workplace violence. This is a serious issue. So what is the next to do for you? I got to go back to my office, get into my safety files, and know whether or not my facility is equipped with a workplace violence written plan. And just so you know, there's a mandatory requirement for a workplace violence separate plan for healthcare, emergency responders, psychiatric, and these types of, and I could read you the whole list, okay? But there's a required separate plan per Title 8, California Codes of Regulation 3342, okay? Because it's the third leading cause of death at work, you may not have it as a separate plan, but you must include it as part of your IIPP, or you could write a short policy on how to respond. I gave you the link because then when you go to this link, you can go to California's guidelines. So these are why guidelines? Didn't just say it's required. Well, remember, per the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, you're required to assess all hazards and prepare for those hazards, how to respond, keep people safe. But only under 3342 for workplace violence on healthcare, emergency responders, psychiatric, all of those outside of that list were not required. But is it a recognized hazard? Heck yes. So am I required to have something in writing? Heck yes. So have a policy, I don't care how short, but have something in writing that goes right along with these guidelines. That's why I put that link there. And these guidelines, I'm sharing already. I'm sharing with you so right here, it says number one, a system for ensuring that employees comply with safe and healthy work practices so that everybody knows that, hey guys, we're not going to allow any behaviors where there's physical assaults or even threats of physical assaults. That means someone threatening to do something to you, either whatever, and you have to have a program where you train them. What does that mean? Or in my facility, it means even posting things that are derogatory against other people, because that causes that hostile environment that could lead to issues of workplace violence. Okay, so number one, a system for ensuring that you tell employees, I'm not going to tolerate any of these threats or physical assaults or words, none of that. Number two, a system for communicating about workplace safety, security hazards, such as how do you tell without fear of reprisal? What that means is historically, we've seen that a lot of people don't say anything because, they don't want to rock the boat. No, that's not allowed. You have to have a system where they can even anonymously. And I know a lot of you wonderful employers say, no, none of that. We are we have a great place of employment. Everybody loves each other here. But the truth is, a lot of the times, we really don't love each other at work, right? As a matter of fact, when you read this guide that I have on your screen, you're going to read also the definitions or the three types of workplace violence that is most common at the workplace. The first one is someone a client or someone, a person who comes and assaults your employee. That's number one. Number two is worker to worker. And that's one with the highest incidence of death and injury, worker to worker. So that environment in the office, that environment in your plants, that environment while working with others is very important to have a system, and also not just of communicating, but also of reporting. So anonymously works wonders. So that way they don't have a fear of reprisal, and they know that someone is saying, here's the problem, it's happening with so-and-so, and it gets handled through counseling first, then warnings, and then you move towards, and your HR people are great at helping you. How do you counsel people? How do you document that counseling? How do you get them to issue those warnings, etc.? 3, procedures for identify workplace security hazards, including periodic scheduled inspections to identify. So inspections are part of it. It looks a lot like the IIPP requirements, right? And that's why the IIPP requirements are cited under it, because for those of you outside of 3342, which is the requirement for having a workplace violence for healthcare emergency responders, psychiatric, etc., outside of that, you would follow the same requirements as if you read your injury and illness prevention program regulation, which is Title 8, 3203. Investigation. Anytime someone tells you, well, so-and-so attacked me in the parking lot and they ended up in the hospital, you better investigate the heck out of that injury. And you're going to improve your workplace violence policy. You're going to do training. You're not going to allow that to happen ever again. Procedures for correcting unsafe conditions. So if someone is already telling you there's a problem, and there's a group of coworkers who is not getting along, or 2 people, or someone is bullying somebody on social media, how are you handling that? What are you doing, employer? There's another type of workplace violence that happens whenever employees come to you and tell you, hey, I'm really afraid. I just got divorced and my spouse is violent, my ex-spouse is violent, and he threatened to come look for me at work. And you go, oh, goodness gracious, poor you. And you do nothing about it. You have to do something about it. So you should brainstorm again, talk to your legal department, talk to your HR department, but several of you have implemented different protections, right? Such as having a picture of that person that your employee already reported to you. I'm in danger. And remember, she or he may be in danger that the ex is coming for them because they know they work there, but the rest of the coworkers, the employees may be in danger too. What if he comes with a weapon, right? So you will want to prevent that through security efforts, security doors, guards, pictures of the person who may come and cause harm, all of that. You can't ignore these types of reports. You just can't ignore these types of reports. Training and instruction about how to recognize work security hazards, etc. And it ends there. But if you go to 3342 for healthcare and other institutions such as psychiatric institutions, emergency responders, because many times they have to deal with let's say, somebody with a mental illness, they're going to be more exposed or a higher risk of suffering an assault. And so they need to know what to do. And the requirement there is go even further. They're more detailed. You have to train them in self-defense, etc. There are certain requirements. Look at 3342. But if you're outside of that list of emergency responders, nursing facilities, healthcare, etc., then you fall within what's on your screen right now, which is the Injury and Illness Prevention Program 1 through 6. Good? Yeah. Why did I go in detail with this? Because it's important. It's the 3rd most common way of dying here in California, workplace violence. So you have to make sure that you take into account mass shootings as well, even if you think it'll never happen to you. And here's the 3 words that you will train and provide to your workers so they know what to do. Run, hide, fight. And I have the link here to the FEMA page for what to do in case of an active shooter situation. They have a ton of resources and videos. They even do specific certification trainings for those that will actually learn how to defuse and do emergency management during active shooting situations. The 3 words a common employee needs to remember is run, hide, fight during a mass shooting. Run, opposite from the person that is shooting, obviously, not towards it. Explain it, please explain it. Hide. Well, if you can't run, hide. Some of you hide in your cubicle. Some of you seek hiding in the area because you know the person is coming close to you and you have no way of running out of the building because of the way that the shooter is coming. And fighting is the last resource, right? The last recourse, because most of the time against the weapon, you will not win that fight. But these are the 3 words FEMA recommends that are your 3 words to remind people what to do in case of this situation. It really helps if you don't tell them about this, because I remember I was given a seminar, and it was a seminar on the Injury and Illness Prevention Program. We went through a lot of things, but one of those that I touched on was workplace violence. Now you see why and the importance of it. And I remember someone raised his hand and said, look, lady, if it's your time, it's your time. You know, if someone is coming with a gun, you're gone. Right? And I'm thinking, it even rhymed. If someone's coming with a gun, you're gone. Well, not so. You have more probability of survival, like I said in the beginning. Your goal when preparing and writing out a response for each of these emergencies, your goal is to diminish the amount of people that are injured or suffer death at work, or to diminish the severity of those injuries. So if you do training, people's training kicks in most of the time, especially when done initially and annually. And they say, oh, run, hide, fight for this one, right? And then for the next one, wildfires, ready, set, go. That's what the actual wildfire readysetgo.org in California tells you to do. Ready has to do with prior to wildfire season. And if you're building, that's a to-do for you today. Go back to your emergency action plan and find out if you have an actual response, what to do during wildfires, right? And what I'm saying here, this is for training. You give people 3 words to remember. But remember, as a facility, it's a lot more complexity to being ready in case of an emergency. You have to know, what type of evacuation, the types of, I go back to that slide right here. Was it procedures? What are you going to do in the event of a wildfire, right? How are you going to report the wildfire? How are you going to account for employees after the evacuation because of the wildfire? What are you going to do in the event of the business closure? How do you get people out of there? How to respond to that wildfire, and how employees will be trained, right? And I'm in the portion of training, right? 3 words, give them 3 words to remember. In the ready part of it is remember that you must get the information or the documentation that you want them to take with them. And this applies really well for homes. And you could also use it to train your family members, because you got to make sure that your house is ready. Just like in a business, you have to make sure your business is ready in case of a fire. How do you make well, if you know you are geographically located next to one of those wildlife sanctuaries of reserves, and wildfires are historically present every year, first thing that they recommend, firefighters will recommend that your building is cleared from all brush, that there's no brush, no dead vegetation around it. So good landscaping for at least 100 meters from the property, that your actual building is up to code and up to date, and it is not, crumbling down, because all of your gutters and walls and windows, all of your enclosures need to be, good seals, not that your building is so old in case of a wildfire, the building will actually crumble, or the firefighters will not be safe just by trying to defend your property against that wildfire, right? So the evacuation happens, and then firefighters also need to know that the building is safe to be at. Set, meaning, you got to make sure what is it that I need during the evacuation, and then going. If possible, go early during wildfires. You don't want to wait till there's a line of cars going down the same avenue or boulevard trying to exit that area because of the evacuation was sounded. You want to make sure that your business evacuates early. Go. 3 words, right? Earthquakes, drop, take cover, hold on. Participate in the shakeout.org annual drill. Everybody pretends there's an earthquake and you do the drop, take cover, hold on. They actually give you different videos for what to do if you don't have a sturdy desk near you to drop, take cover, and hold on, or if you're near glass, or if you're outside the building, or if you're in stairs. They have great videos. And this is the part where I play the video And then you tell them, okay, the building's shaking. What do we do? And you want them to do it because kinesthetically, you want them to feel, their knees against the asphalt and their hands covering their neck, and they bent over protecting their internal organs, because that's why they take cover, to protect. If anything falls during an earthquake, you want to make sure that your internal organs and your head is covered, your neck, those weak parts of your body, right? And hold on to that desk or that chair because it's going to move during the earthquake. And when are they safe to actually do the evacuation? You see, this is different than a flood or a wildfire. That's why the response needs to be delineated in writing and then reviewed with them and then practiced. So at least your evacuation drill needs to be practiced. Texas is having the second record-breaking worst floods in the history of the state. Do you think it's important to be ready? Heck yes. So what you need to do is now go to this link that I have for flooding, and I'm going to send it along with all of the resources I'm going to send today, and make sure that you plan, you keep informed, and that you leave early. These are the 3 things they recommend for floods. You see how just 3 phrases for each of the emergencies that will help employees remember and clear confusion, right? No confusion. I love this one. If you're under a flood warning, find safe shelter right away. Do not walk, swim, or drive through flood water. Stay off bridges over fast moving water. And the thing that you need to teach people to do is determine wherever you're at. If it's a flash flooding, determine your best protection based on the type of flooding. So evacuate if told to do so, right? Or if you can't evacuate, you move to higher ground. You could even go to the roof of the building, or staying where you are because it is more dangerous, because the water flash flooding happens so fast that you've got 6 inches of rain moving through the street, and that's going to take your legs under you, and that's not going to be good. Okay, so stay where you are. And that's what this nice chart is telling you. Determine your best protection based on the type of flooding. Guys, that's all what I have for you. I hope it was helpful. Let me stop that share. So I gave you a list of to-dos. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand or chat with me. I'm happy to assist. So I'm going to stop the recording and then we can ask questions.